So we are here today talking about providing remote services. I am Laura Quinn with Idealware. I'm here with a number of people. That also includes Elizabeth Pope, also from Idealware. Just a quick overview of Idealware for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a nonprofit ourselves dedicated to providing research about software and technology options for nonprofits. And that is, in fact, exactly what we'll be doing today. So we we were commissioned by LSNTAP, thank you very much, to actually do some research into what is working in the field for both legal services organization and other human services organization for delivering services remotely. So we'll talk a little bit about what we actually did in terms of that research, and then we'll talk through three key categories of remote service delivery. So actually taking services on the road, like in a bus or via kiosks. We'll talk about helping people from afar, so over a phone, via video conference, via SMS, and winding up with providing compelling on-demand resources, something that the legal aid world is already doing a lot with, and we'll talk about kind of expanding that even more. And then lastly, we'll pull some kind of key themes that we heard from the research. So I introduced myself briefly. Elizabeth, you want to just say a brief word or two about yourself and your involvement in the project?
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Pope. I'm the senior researcher at Idealware. So I help to conduct interviews and write reports and articles based on our research. I actually did most of the case studies in this presentation. So I will be covering those slides and also jumping in throughout the presentation with lessons learned from those discussions.
Terrific. And we are really lucky to have with us Tony Liu at the Immigration Advocates Network. Tony, you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am formerly an immigration attorney myself, a recovering immigration attorney. Up until recently, many folks on this webinar might know me from being on staff at Pro Bono Net as the Pro Bono and Special Initiatives Coordinator. And as of July, I'm now full-time staff with the Immigration Advocates Network, supporting their Citizenship Works project.
Fantastic. And we're also lucky to have Ed Higgins with the Montana Legal Services Association. Ed, just a quick word.
I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Montana Legal Services, and if anybody wonders what that means, if you come up with a good answer, let me know, because I've been doing it for a year and I'm still not quite sure what it means, other than it means that I do things like help reach out to our client communities, make them aware of services, and also reach out to the other communities we're involved with, like the legal community, the judges, that sort of thing.
Fantastic. And as I think most of you know, Montana has been doing a lot of different stuff using technologies to reach out to their really quite geographically remote crowd. So I'm really excited to have Ed here to talk a little bit about some of the things they're doing. All right, fantastic. So just in general, so all of us often cover large geographic areas, and often only have one or a few offices. And we really wanted to know what works to provide long-distance services. So what technologies help, what's proven in this world, what's less so, so what's a easy bang for the buck, and what's going to be a little more of a high risk, high reward. How much will it cost? How do I reach out to tell people these things exist? These are the questions that we had going in that we wanted to try to find the answers to. And what we did to try to find those answers is we spoke to 12 different organizations. So we spoke to 7 different people within the legal aid sector. So consultants, experts, staffers at legal aid organizations. And we spoke to 5 other staffers of organizations in the human sector realm. Most of these folks, we talked about actual practical applications of things that they were doing in the field. So we gathered case studies, advice, lessons learned, and we analyzed what we learned to provide an overview for you guys as to what's actually going on out in the field, both in legal services and in other spaces. And then, as we'll talk about at the end, kind of some of the key trends we saw, the key kind of factors that were the same across a lot of the different case studies. So as I mentioned, we kind of divided the world of possibilities into three fairly distinct possibilities for providing remote services. So there's this first idea of taking services on the road, which we'll in fact start with and talk about in just a minute. There's then the idea of using a phone or chat or various things to help people live, but from a distance. And then these on-demand resources. So that's the bulk of this whole seminar today. We're going to walk through these one by one. Starting with taking services on the road. And this is an area in which technology offers interesting options that really weren't so true in the past. So things like kiosks and more prevalent internet access via satellite or via 4G are really making a difference in what you can do in this space. And we wanted to start by talking a little bit about the Montana Legal Services Association and what they're doing with a really interesting kiosk project. Ed, you want to talk a little to this?
Sure. So the idea of the kiosk project was to somehow reach out and have a presence in communities where we don't have people. And we chose some sites. All of them are more on the eastern side of the state than I am. And we put these kiosks in, and what the kiosks did was give people access to all of our online resources, even if they personally don't have access to the internet. And they also give people access to live help, which some of you may be familiar with, so that if they can't find what they're looking for, they have the option of using the live help to connect with a live help navigator that can say, that's familiar with the website, that can say, look in these areas. Can you pop up the next slide? I think it's the map. Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this map is it shows the kiosk locations, and you can also see that it shows part of North and South Dakota, a little bit of Wyoming. It, however, does not show me. Montana is so big that in order to show you where those kiosks were, we couldn't get the west side of the state where I'm located on the map. But the flag for B is actually located in a tribal court, and in addition to having a button for live help and a button to access resources, the regular resources, it also has a button that allows folks to access tribal court information and resources. So a little bit different option there. And I think if you pop up the next slide, we can see a little bit of, this is the real basic entry page, and people essentially have two choices. They can go to the Montana Law Help site, look for information on their own, or they can go to Live Help and ask for help finding the information, or as I said, the one that's in the tribal court, there's a third option for tribal resources. So as you can see, it's a pretty cheap way to get a presence, but what we found is that you have to be kind of careful. We have the kiosks in courthouses, in libraries. What we found is that the libraries are more accessible to a lot of people, but the kiosks in the courthouses get used more. And when I say more accessible, I mean open more hours. We also found that you have to be careful in choosing your partners. You really have to find folks who want the kiosk there more than you want to place it there as your partner, so that they're involved in making sure that it's functioning and directing people to it, because it is essentially just a desktop computer. It's just a computer sitting there, and if customers at the clerk's office don't know that they can go find a form on the kiosk and print it out, well, it's not going to get used. We also did find that if they go down and you're not physically there, you need to have a good partner who's willing to call you and tell you, hey, there's a problem with the kiosk, so that you can get it fixed, because otherwise it doesn't get fixed. You don't know about it because you're not physically present in the community where it is, and yet people hold you responsible for the fact that it doesn't work when you didn't know it wasn't working. So it's important to have a good partner who's going to support you and also tell you, hey, something's not working, so you can get it fixed. And the software, the screenshot that you kind of see there, the kiosk is essentially locked, so you only have access to certain sites when you go up and use it. And so, it's not the kind of place where somebody's going to be looking at inappropriate things on the internet. I think that's about what I got.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit to these kind of barriers and key success factors?
Well, obviously courthouses here, at least in Montana, are open from 8 to 5, which can be in itself a barrier for folks if they need to go and spend some time reading through the instructions for a form, downloading a form, getting the information they need to resolve their problem. Being limited to those hours, as I say, can be kind of restrictive. That's why libraries can be useful, because they're open into the evening, and they're open on weekends. The thing about it is that the kiosks were incredibly inexpensive to roll out. We've had one library say, well, we already have this computer that's used for one thing, but it doesn't get very much use. Could we do a kiosk with it and just install the software so that we have this piece of machinery that's getting used for a couple of things? And that made it, in fact, even more inexpensive to use an existing workstation in the library, and we were just paying for software licenses. The kiosk software is pretty stable, doesn't require a lot of upkeep, but again, every now and then something does go wrong, and you have to be, unless you want to be traveling, you have to be set up so that you can access that remotely and try and resolve the issues.
Absolutely. And Callie asks that she's curious as to why you think the libraries have been yet less utilized than the courthouses.
I think that's a question of just where somebody is. Now, certainly we don't have any of the kiosks, we don't have a community where we've got one in the courthouse and the library, but I think people are more likely to do the instant gratification thing. Okay, I've been to the clerk's office, they tell me I need X, go to the kiosk that's right there in the courthouse and get X. Yeah. They're less likely to take care of it if they have to go across town, which may only be a few blocks away, but go across town to a library to access that information.
Jeff had a question here. What software are you using on the kiosks?
I knew somebody was going to ask that, and I can't remember the name of it, but I can find out. I will.
If you do find out, email us, and we'll add it to a blog post on the topic.
I will do that. I will. I'll find out, and I'll let Brian know.
And the function of the kiosk software, if I'm right, is basically simply to keep it in, it's almost like a security thing, yeah, that it keeps it in the internet mode and makes it so people can't fiddle with it, yeah? Is that the purpose of the software?
The kiosk software itself just, is what allows us to limit to, 2 or 3 options of what people can do.
Yep.
So it's pretty, it's almost like security more than anything else.
Yep. Terrific.
Yeah,
Great. Any other questions for Ed?
Yeah, we set up a kiosk project here off of BTOP money, and one of our partners was a tribe that we're still evaluating. And we ended up not locking it down, but we just used the default screen on it as the legal resources. We're curious to see what the use on the computer actually is, but we'll report back on that when we know more.
Terrific. Great. Well, certainly if you have questions for Ed, we can circle back around. Let's at the moment talk about 2 other case studies. Elizabeth's going to walk us through first talking about NYLAG's Justice Bus, Mobile Legal Help Center, and then talk about in fact, a boat.
Absolutely. So first off, I want to say that Camilla Jenkins, who is the Director of Communications for NYLAG, wanted to be on this call, but being based in New York, they are still dealing with fallout from Superstorm Sandy. So she sends her regrets, and I will do my best to convey all the great information she shared with me. So the NYLAG Mobile Legal Help Center is a custom-built vehicle that I've been referring to as an RV, But actually, in my discussion with Camilla, she said it's not quite an RV. It's akin to what paramedics use when they go on the road. So it's a massive thing, as you can imagine. The vehicle was donated last year in total by a private donor, the David Berg Foundation, and they're actually partnering with the New York City court system to deliver legal services on the vehicle. So the NYLAG Mobile Legal Help Center navigates throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City and Long Island to underserved communities that need legal assistance. Camilla reports that the kinds of cases that they're getting on the bus are actually quite similar to what they get in their offices. So it's a lot of housing, DV cases, that kind of thing. But the people that they're reaching are often people who've never sought legal aid before, people for whom English is not their first language, people for whom perhaps child or elder care prevents them from traveling into the offices in the city. So it's been incredibly successful. As I mentioned, the vehicle was donated, and the staff attorney who is dedicated to staying on the vehicle is being funded through a grant from, I think it might actually be the UJA. I can confirm that. And then there's a rotating cast of legal students and volunteers who help staff the RV. So the vehicle itself, do you want to go over to the next slide, Laura? Thank you. The vehicle itself this is a cross-section of it. It can fit 17 people. And there is actually a private space for 4 different meeting rooms. And there is a video conferencing link that provides access to judges in the New York City court system. So they can actually conduct emergency proceedings like unlawful evictions and orders of protection right from the vehicle, which is incredible. The calendar link you're seeing there is the Google Calendar, which is posted on NYLAG's website. The organization partners with community centers and representatives, city representatives and state representatives, to actually arrange for visits and the scheduling. So they don't have to deal with sort of lining up appointments. They just show up to, Stratford Avenue in the Bronx, and their partners there will say, we have these 12 people who want to see lawyers today. So the barriers and keys to success. One of the barriers is actually just physically navigating the vehicle around New York City. As you can imagine, a 41-foot vehicle is not a picnic to drive. And in fact, there are entire roads that are restricted to vehicles of that size. They have a designated driver who's a retired, I think he's a retired bus driver. So he knows how to do it. But generally, Camilla said that they are now on sort of year 2, and they're going back over routes that were very successful in year 1, and perhaps not going on routes that provided or that posed problems last year. So the scheduling piece, they were able to be very successful by partnering with these community centers and representatives, and not just showing up and relying on the constituents to know and trust the vehicle when it's journeying to these locations. The data signals, Camilla said, have been improving, but they rely mostly on a wireless network, and that can be quite spotty. But she shared with me that they quite recently were able to conduct their first emergency hearing from Brooklyn, and that was a huge success. So I think this vehicle is quite sophisticated. I think it cost in the 6 figures just for the vehicle, and then obviously funding staff to travel along with it is an additional expense. However, I think it's in a really interesting case study in terms of finding partners in your community that you're going to serve remotely in order to truly expand the reach of your organization.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. And we have a couple of questions. So Helen is asking, and Ed, I'm wondering if you can see if you can take this on. Helen's asking, do you do conflict checks before providing legal advice? So what's your thought in this kind of less formal setting as to how you deal with conflict checks, if you do?
Well, in terms of the kiosk project, we're only given legal information. We're not giving legal advice. So under our ethics rules, we don't have to do conflict checks with that. And so, you know, I guess we don't is the answer because of what we're doing. We don't use the live help to provide legal advice. We use it only to provide legal information.
And
This is Tony. If that question was meant in terms of the context of the NYLAG mobile legal center, I'm actually, Pro Bono Net has worked with NYLAG.
Oh, great.
We explored using the legal center for one of our projects, and my understanding is, and I also was formerly a staff attorney at NYLAG, so I understand that working a little bit. But I do believe that because they have an internet connection on the mobile law center, they can remote into their case management system to conduct a conflict check.
Terrific. Great. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you.
And another question for Ed. So Jeffrey's asking, what are the approximate usage numbers for the Montana Kiosk project?
Wow, you know, I should have looked that up. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I think that's the same guy who wanted to know what the software was, and I have an answer for that question.
Great.
It's a product called Site Kiosk, and if you just Google up Site Kiosk, run together as one word, you can see the company's website, and the company that makes it is called Provisio, but that's the software that we're using for the kiosks. I will see if I can, since I was able to answer that question during the webinar, I'll see if I can get some usage numbers to provide as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ed. Great. Great. We have another interesting case study. So this goes beyond the legal services realm. So one of the things that we wanted to do is look to see what was going on in other sectors. And one of the really interesting things that's going on in the kind of the space of remote service delivery is the whole idea of telemedicine. And so we have an interesting telemedicine case study for you. Elizabeth?
Yes, so leaving the land to the high seas. Here in Maine, there are a lot of remote island communities off the coast that are pretty far-flung. So especially in the winter, when ferry service is curtailed, oftentimes islanders have trouble getting basic services like health services. So the Maine Seacoast Mission is based out of Bar Harbor on Mount Desert Island. It's an old organization. It's over 100 years old. It was started with religious intent to bring sort of, clergy members to the island. About 11 years ago, they started doing more health services. And Sharon Daly, who is the designated nurse who travels on this boat, spoke with me a few weeks ago. She actually came on board at the same time, and there's Sharon. She came on board at the same time that the telemed unit was installed in the Sunbeam, which is the name of the boat. So that's Sharon, and she's treating a patient on board using the telemedicine setup that the Sunbeam has on board. So the way that and this is actually, through my research, I discovered this is not incredibly out of the ordinary for telemedicine. What makes it unique is that it's on a boat. So Sharon right now is doing an exam in the picture of a patient using an otoscope, which is the thing that you use to look in the ears, with a high-def camera attached, and it's being beamed through ISDN, the Integrated Services Digital Network line, to a doctor on the mainland. And he is able to actually see the camera. So what Sharon does is she does the pre-exam, sort of does basic, tell me where it hurts type things. liaises with the doctor on the mainland to do the more sophisticated diagnosis. And that bandwidth number of 3,000 kilobits per second, I believe, is that happened in 2008. They were able to dramatically upgrade it from 128 kilobits per second to 3,000. So just in the past few years, they have really upgraded the technology on this boat. So if you want to go to the next slide, Laura. Thank you. So the telemed unit uses a similar approach to the Mobile Legal Health Center. It actually just uses a Google Calendar to tell islanders when they, when the boat will be on shore. And if you look at the map, that shows the outreach of the boat. So it travels, I think, a pretty regimented schedule. So I think, the third Tuesday of the month they go to Matinicus or something like that. And so islanders know when the boat is coming. And Sharon has been working, like I said, for 11 years, and she's really become ingrained in the lives of a lot of these islanders. She's actually been able to establish relationships with practitioners who have relationships with some of these islands. So who live in Maine or even Boston, but who summer or have a vacation home or just a family connection to a lot of these islands. And so that actually helps build rapport with patients. So it's not, some random person you've never met. It's, Dave who spends the summer on the island, which I think is really fascinating. So that's a huge piece of the success here, is really, again, being ingrained in the lives of the constituents that they're serving remotely. Can you go to the next slide, Laura? Awesome. So some of the barriers here are actually just scheduling again. So the doctors are busy people, and Sharon's found that this works both ways to find providers who have personal connections to the islands. Not only do islanders trust them, but doctors are much more likely to sort of become involved and donate their time, because Sharon told me a lot of times they have some problems with insurance, actually reimbursing the doctors for these visits, interestingly. So actually finding doctors with personal connections to the islands has been a real success for both, getting people to help out and helping people. The reluctance of the population to seek healthcare, that is, I don't know if you guys have a stereotype in your mind of a Maine islander, but some of these folks maybe don't see doctors that often. And so, having a camera, having a stethoscope with a camera in it might seem a little, invasive. So Sharon said she's just tried really hard to establish this long-term relationship, and, she'll walk around the islands and say, "Hey, Jerry, I haven't seen you in a while. Come on to the boat." And then she gets Jerry on the boat and finds out, he's actually been sick for weeks. So the keys to success, I think, are pretty much tied to, like I said, establishing ties with the community. And the technology can be a little bit troublesome. Sharon says that sometimes it cuts out, and it's not like they can, conference in an IT person too easily. So when there's trouble with technology, it's pretty disruptive to a doctor visit. And the integration to the community, including making the boat actually a place for socializing. So, Sharon will set up like a coffee hour for people to come on board, and then sort of get them a flu shot too while they're there chatting. So I thought that was a really interesting means of making sure that everybody comes on board the boat for their checkups. So that is the main Seacoast mission.
And I think that this is really, I'm really fascinated in terms of its application to the legal aid sector, especially by this idea of a model of video conferencing in the expert, so in legal aid sector, potentially video conferencing in the lawyer, but having somebody in the traveling vehicle, not necessarily a boat, but having someone in the traveling vehicle who is more of a community face, doesn't necessarily need to be potentially a lawyer herself, but could be somebody who is an interface to the community and can do the scheduling and to get people lined up. I think this is a really kind of fascinating model. And just to talk a little bit about one of the things that we were really looking as we were doing this research is to try to see how established these things were. And pretty much everything we've talked about here, so kiosks, like the idea of operating from a bus, the idea of telemedicine, they're all very proven models. There was lots of examples of, in fact, there were a number of examples of legal service buses. Lots of examples of people using telemedicine. So this is all an area where there's a fair amount of track record of success, which is exciting. Questions, thoughts, comments on this idea of taking services on the road before we kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about providing live help at a distance?
I was going to throw out, I got some answers to the kiosk usage question.
Fabulous.
Thanks, Ed.
And they're based on the first 6 months that we had the kiosks in place. But we have the three kiosks, and what we found on average is that people were accessing the kiosks about 50 times a month, spread across the three kiosks. And just so if anybody wants to look at population figures, those kiosks are in Miles City, Montana, Lewistown, Montana, and Wolf Point, Montana. Wolf Point is the one that's in the tribal court. These are pretty small towns. So when we're saying 50 accesses spread across those three kiosks, it's not a huge number, but relative to the population, it's pretty good.
Great. And Ed, I'm curious, or Tony, whoever wants to take this, listening to these case studies of things that you have not done yourself. So Tony, so things like kiosks and the telemed model with the videoing the expert, or Ed with the idea of the bus or the telemed. Are there things here that seem particularly interesting to you that you'd like to see, more going on with legal aid organizations?
Well, I personally find the idea of the bus or the RV or the legal ambulance, I find that absolutely fascinating. But I know that in more remote rural areas like Montana, our experience has been that if we do things that involve making people wait for access, because our population density is so low, we're not actually going to end up serving those people. So if we're only able to get to a remote community once a month with a clinic, or we did some work with video conferencing family law clinics, we found that there were a lot of people who just wouldn't wait. They would find another way to resolve their problem. And so I think that's a function of population density. I think, New York, I think there was a legal services program in Ventura that had the Winnebago of Justice. The population density there is higher, and I think higher enough to support those kinds of resources. And I suspect that we would find that it didn't work as well for us because people just won't wait for it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And Helen makes an interesting comment, which I think is really right on, that these ideas of, the kind of the Winnebago of Justice or the boat, it allows the people in that vehicle to pick up potentially systematic issues requiring long-term community development and not just give quick advice. So there's this idea of partnering with the community and understanding really something about the community as opposed to just answering questions.
Yeah, actually, Sharon was instrumental in getting a long-term care facility on one of the islands for the elderly islanders. I think it was Islesboro. So that totally speaks to that.
Terrific.
And one last thing on the NYLAG Mobile Legal Center is that in terms of disaster assistance, it's actually for post-Sandy work in those areas that have been hardest hit in New York City. It's actually it's been the perfect fit for being able to provide assistance to those folks who are trying to understand how to access FEMA benefits or dealing with housing issues or public benefits issues in the wake of Sandy, because they can take that RV out to the areas where people are having difficulty traveling into cities. And NYLAG themselves, they were located downtown and I think are going to be without their central office for another 6 weeks. But because they have this facility, they have this mobile legal center, they're able to continue to providing services to those who've been hardest hit.
I think that is a great example of using technology and having it come up as a godsend, as a savior in a situation that you never expected it to apply in. And I mean, I'm sure when NYLAG got that vehicle, they didn't ever think we're going to use this to help people to recover from a natural disaster. But what a perfect way to use something that you have.
Yep. Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to make sure that we get through kind of all of our different possibilities here. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about providing live help at a distance. So the idea that you've got a constituent on one side of, the state potentially, and you've got a lawyer or someone else who can help on the other side of the state, and we're going to try to connect them live. So many of the core technologies aren't new in this area. So obviously a telephone is a great technology that can help connect people across a state. And that certainly shouldn't be discounted, that there's a lot of possibilities with a telephone conversation. I kind of suspected that you didn't want me to present telephone case studies, and so we are not. But don't forget that. And certainly live chat is another technology which is really interesting in this area that I know there's been a lot of traction in the legal aid area with. And actually, maybe just to put you on the spot a little bit, Ed, I know that you've been using live chat, obviously with the kiosks, and also on your own Montana Law Help site. Can you just talk in a minute or two as to how you find the live chat works for you, what its kind of niche is for you, and what it's good for?
Well, we use it as a navigation tool. We use it to help people find resources. And as I said before, we don't give legal advice on it, but I think it works really well to help people navigate the sites, help people find resources. It allows us to say things like, wow, you've asked a question that's going to require some legal advice to answer. We can't do that for you right now, but here's the link to the online application for Montana Legal Services. They can give you the advice that you need. So I think it is really quite valuable for us in that way. I myself have acted as a live help navigator, and I think I've had some pretty helpful, useful interactions with folks via the live chat or live help. So I like it. We like it as a program.
Terrific. Any idea what kind of...
NTAP also runs live chat, and we do use it for the navigation. We also can answer basic tech questions, and occasionally we will refer people onto a listserv or to a legal aid organization if they're asking for legal help. But it's definitely been useful to have, and the technology it can run in the background. Liz does a great job with it here. So.
Terrific. Great. Video conferencing is, I know, of keen interest in this space, and it's becoming easier almost day to day at this point to technically make a video conference happen. So we're looking here at actually screenshots from Skype on the left and Google Hangouts on the right, which are pretty reasonable ways to do video conferencing. However, it's really important to think about whether your community itself, so the people that you're serving, are going to have video conferencing, or like if they're in a library, for instance, is video conferencing really the best answer? So people who have computers may often have access to a webcam, but there's probably a lot of your constituents who, in fact, don't have computers. So there's a couple of different models that people are using video conference. So I'm going to talk about one case study, and Tony's going to talk a little bit about some of the things they're thinking about, and I'll also throw into the mix the kind of the telemedicine model, where you're doing a video conferencing to conference in the lawyer from some other location from where the lawyer is. So let's talk about a different model here. This is an organization called Our Kids. Our Kids is actually a private foster care and adoption agency. So they are actually a for-profit firm, kind of creepily. They partnered with AT&T in a big pro bono effort by AT&T they did actually a whole bunch of various things involving lots of mobile devices for caseworkers and stuff like that. But among that project, they provided broadband internet service, not only to the caseworkers themselves as part of it, so they actually all had cell phones and laptops and tethers to be able to get wireless access on their laptops on the road. They also provided internet broadband services to all the foster care families as part of their pro bono project. And Our Kids, the agency, uses it for informal check-ins with children. So there's federal regulations for foster care and for adoptions. There's a whole bunch of government regulations around it, and one of the regulations states that you can't use video conferencing to replace the actual visitation of a child. Like, you need to visit a foster child every so often, and video conferencing doesn't count. But many agencies do more check-ins than they are actually required to by law, and they can use video conferencing for that. And as you can see here, it's a pretty powerful way to actually talk to a kid and see how they're doing. So this is an interesting, so it's kind of just the idea of having, you know, a lawyer or a caseworker on one side and somebody with an actual broadband connection on the other to provide services. Tony and Pro Bono Net have been thinking about a number of different models for how video conferencing could work in the legal aid sector. Tony, you want to just take a minute or two to talk through some of these concepts?
Sure. So at various conferences in the past year, this has become a topic where I think there's been an intense amount of interest, and we've been thinking about a couple of different ways of using this. And I'll preface that just by saying that in our experience, as we've been exploring these, the using video chat to replace phone calls helps in a lot of ways, and in particular, it helps in building rapport between an advocate and the person being served, and I think that we can't ignore the importance of that advantage. So one of the ways that we're really interested in doing this is building out a platform that would allow somebody, in combining it with the a document assembly application, to allow an applicant to complete an A2J form, and then with like the click of a button be able to connect with an advocate or attorney on the other end to review their form. And this, we sort of came up with this idea and then discovered that H&R Block have kind of beat us to the punch, and they do this with their tax services. And their service is called Block Live, and it allows you to prepare your tax returns, and then it presents you with kind of a matrix of various tax professionals that are available to help you, and you can either email them or text message with them, or click a button to actually connect on a video chat with them. And we're looking to do this in areas, particularly right now in citizenship, where the idea would be that people who are interested in applying for naturalization can use an A2J interview to guide themselves through the actually populating a form, and then just have a naturalization expert review it to make sure that one, that they're eligible and not going to get themselves into any kind of legal issues by filing an application, and then two, just helping them to finalize and complete the application and make any edits. And then another area that we're experimenting with video conferencing is a project here in New York, in the New York Family Courts. The New York City Family Courts have a volunteer attorney for the day pro bono program that's very successful. What they're not so successful in doing is getting the volunteers to go anywhere other than Brooklyn and Manhattan to volunteer. And so we're helping the courts set up video conferencing where the attorneys that are in the Brooklyn and Manhattan family courts will be able to provide video consultations, video chat consultations to unrepresented litigants in Staten Island in the first instance, and then in the future in other counties in the rest of New York. And then ultimately the idea would be to allow those volunteer attorneys to actually provide those consultations from their own offices. And the focus on there would be to make sure that you have a trained core of volunteer attorneys that don't need the direct mentorship and guidance in person that they might get otherwise if they were physically at the courthouse. But then eventually you can imagine, particularly in New York City with its large number of big law attorneys who love doing these types of unbundled pro bono clinics, if they could do that from their own offices, you're able to deliver those services to unrepresented litigants anywhere in the state.
Fantastic. And Callie asks, we are looking into partnering with healthcare providers and using their telemedicine technology for in-office referrals. Fascinating, thank you. But it's not clear how secure the data transmission will need to be. Has anyone considered this already? So a few thoughts in this area. Certainly a telemedicine provider is going to need to be far more secure in almost all cases, I would think, than you will need to be, because they are covered by HIPAA regulations, which requires very strict guidelines on patient confidentiality. So anything in which a doctor is doing medical exams is certainly going to be secure enough for legal device. And I think a good kind of just mental model for this is comparing the security compared to a phone line. So we give advice over phone lines all the time. There's no reason to suspect that video conferencing is less secure than a phone line, which is in fact not very secure in of itself. So balancing, as in fact we'll be talking about at the end, balancing the issues like confidentiality and security around the ability to simply serve more people who are remote. So I think that there are certainly, it's worth considering, but I think that it's not security shouldn't be an overriding issue as to whether you're doing this or not.
I strongly agree with the note put forward with regards to HIPAA and them being covered. Legal realm definitely has similar ethics rules, although not the federal statute. Additionally, though, the software of using video conferencing may be significantly less secure than a telephone line, depending on whether it's using a secure protocol or not, and whether it's on an open or closed Wi-Fi network. I think there are definitely additional considerations for
especially an open Wi-Fi network. Yes, I apologize. I did not take that into account. Perfect. Let's see. Let us talk, so let me mention, so we're kind of talking about what is, in our research, what is widely done and what is not widely done. So video conferencing was interestingly really quite difficult to find case studies of people doing human services through video conferencing. And I'm not sure precisely why that is. So I would say that it kind of falls between the proven and the unproven. There's clearly the technology itself is proven. There may be limitations from using it that mean that people are not providing services through it as much as we certainly could not find as many examples of it as we could with things like telemedicine is a form of video conferencing, but the idea of direct links to folks through a web conferencing tool, even a secure web conferencing tool. Here's another one that we did some notable investigation of. Anybody who was with us 2 months ago for our mobile seminar, so it's providing services through mobile devices, heard a little bit about this particular case study called Text for Life, where they do suicide prevention through text messages. We were really fascinated by this possibility as a possibility of providing, possibly legal advice via SMS text message. But we were unable to reach these people after trying a lot, and we were unable to find really many other rolled out and proven versions of providing services through, actually providing advice type services through SMS text messaging. Here's another actually interesting example of something that is still kind of in an experimental mode. So this is a text-to-loan microfinance program. So basically it allows borrowers to submit a loan application via SMS, so in 140-character chunks. So you could imagine that, so certainly a complex interaction that's been simplified into discrete chunks. There's a remote loan officer who is potentially asking questions via SMS. This is, I think, a really interesting idea, and what you're seeing is actually a legitimate piece of technology that exists. But it is not really rolled out and proven yet. So basically I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to jump in, Laura. I just wanted to point out that the way they've gone around, this is Elizabeth, the way they've gone around the character limit is to have a loan key. And so they have an actual code that gets sent to their text message when their mobile phone rather, when they get approved for a loan. And they show that key to the loan officer. So I think that's an even more simplified version. So it's not even advice or chunks of text, it's an actual code.
So they're filling it out online and then they're sending a code to the loan officer? Is that the idea?
Yeah, they're texting, they're texting like, I want a $20 loan to the loan officer, and the loan officer, if they're approved, they text back a key, so like the 8063, and then they show that to the person who's actually in town. So this is actually in Bihar, India, where this is being tested. They show it to the person in town who actually will disperse the loan. So yeah, and this is the result of us really beating the bushes to try to find examples of SMS use for providing kind of advice-based services. So this is still a frontier that I'm not sure that there's a few people kicking the tires, but it's certainly not a very robustly fleshed out area as of yet. Exactly.
All right, so I'm interested in moving fairly quickly into this next section for the interest of time. But Tony or Ed, any thoughts on those kind of possibilities that we talked about there, or anybody have any questions on any of that stuff before we move on?
I think in the text area, one of the few case studies that I've seen that's been pretty good was put on by TechSoup about 2 years back, and they looked at ISIS, who is a nonprofit internet sexuality information services that targets reproductive health questions for teens. The reason they went with texting was the prevalence of the use in their target demographic. And I will see if I can find a link to that and share it in one of our blog posts. That's one of the few text message-based nonprofit outreach things that I've seen.
Fabulous. Thanks, Brian. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about providing compelling on-demand online resources. So this is an area in which legal aid organizations are generally doing a lot, potentially a lot more than many other human services organizations. So this is probably not a site that surprises you. This is so Michigan's legal help site, but most of the state organizations have this type of site where people can go in to get really fairly detailed information about legal services. So keep in mind as we're talking through things that we're going further afield in this area because in fact people are doing a lot already. Though at times the information may not be in the format that is the most usable and the most appealing to the target audiences. So it's worth thinking about, are there ways to instead of providing big chunks of text about legal stuff, are there ways to boil it down? Are there ways to make it more compelling or digestible? so that people are more likely to use it and understand it. So let's start by talking a little bit about the We Own the Dream project, which is an interesting example of, so this is an A to J project that Tony will talk a little about with a fairly substantial promotion element. Tony?
Yeah, so We Own the Dream is a site that was launched to in response to the White House's policy granting deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, as many of you probably have heard of. It's a partnership between the Immigration Advocates Network and Pro Bono Net, as well as a number of other immigration advocacy organizations, but was also primarily kind of headed up by the United We Dream organization, which is one of the main organizations behind pushing the Dream Act. And so it's interesting in a number of ways. If you could go to the next slide. As was mentioned earlier, it is an A to J project, so it uses the A to J interface, but it's currently using the A to J to provide what we're calling a screening tool, and the eligibility tool goes through the basic requirements of the deferred action for childhood arrival benefits, and then provides a printable PDF information sheet. And what we're working on is a second component that will allow individuals to actually complete the DACA application itself. And the thing that was kind of interesting about this project in particular is that not long after the announcement of the policy, as organizations started talking about how the legal community is going to serve this large number of youth that are likely to be eligible, it became clear that with many of those those youth in the leadership position of trying to think about the response, there was almost an expectation that these tools should already exist, and an impatience that that there needed to be some ramp-up time in order to create them. And so we're dealing with a target population here that is actually kind of ideal in terms of developing these types of technology solutions that will allow for these on-demand on-demand applications. Right now, there's more than 13,000 individuals have already used the screening tool, and we're anticipating releasing the tool that will actually create the DACA application form itself in the coming weeks, and are hopeful that that will fill a gap and help people to apply for DACA. The tool, if you could go to the next slide.
Sorry.
So the tool is just one component of the We Own the Dream website. There's also an SMS text messaging campaign associated with the website, and the website is weownthedream.org. And then the SMS component is actually it serves two purposes. One, it's opt-in, so individuals can add their information to this SMS text alert pop-up, and then that provides a list, essentially on the back end, the United We Dream folks now have a list of people who are interested in learning more about DACA, or are interested in learning about applying, how they can apply themselves. And one of the benefits of this is if you use a mobile text service provider like Mobile Commons, which I think is what's used here, if there are events or clinics or something happening for an applicant, they can get.
Hold on for just a second. I'm losing the audio. Could you speak up a little bit? Or
okay, sorry. Is that better?
Let's try, let me just find you, Tony. Tony, I'm going to very briefly mute you and then unmute you with the hope that that will help the line. All right, try that now.
Okay. Is that better? Is that better?
No, we're getting a lot of feedback.
Hang on 1 second.
Are you on voice over IP or telephone?
I am. Let me see. I didn't Setting. Hang on a second. Are you able to hear me now?
You sound a
The
bit like
same.
Silent.
Yeah. Yes, and with a Cylon with an echo. Let me try one more thing. I'm going to mute everybody, and then just unmute you and me, Tony, and to see. Sometimes when I find these tools, it helps to have less lines going on. All right. Any change, Tony?
I don't know. Test.
Unfortunately.
No. Give me. Sorry.
Maybe the thing to do, so it is really quite bad, unfortunately, Tony. Maybe the thing to do is to, we'll come back to this case study. Is there a possibility of calling in from a different line or using the, if you're not already, so calling in on a telephone or using the mic and speakers if you're not already?
Yeah, I'll try to. I'll give that a try.
Way better. We
better?
fixed it. We cured it.
Okay.
We scared it.
Okay. All right. So aware that I've kind of lost a chunk of my time, I'll kind of zip through this. But the idea is that by allowing people to opt into a mobile text campaign, not only are you capturing their information, so they can be more involved in future efforts around both policy advocacy for the DREAM Act, but also you can push out information about clinics and events that are happening in their area. So another component to the We Own the Dream site is a comprehensive calendar of DACA clinics that are happening around the country. And so that was actually a big component to the outreach and publicity for the site, because not only did United We Dream already have a very active campaign that was already taking place around the DREAM Act, having a very reliable, centralized calendar of DACA clinics that were taking place around the country led to the website becoming kind of a magnet for people to go to the site to find out and find more information. So sort of part and parcel of the sort of holistic project. Next slide. So just a couple of barriers and keys to success. One of the challenges was trying to get this built very quickly when it wasn't clear after the announcement what the actual application would look like and what the requirements would be. And there was also USCIS, as they want to do, they create new categories of legal definition that require a lot of lawyers to put their heads together to kind of figure out what it means. And so it was kind of a moving target trying to develop an A to J interview that would provide reliable information when that information was not clear to the lawyers themselves. And then currently right now A to J is not available, particularly through LawHelp Interactive, on iOS devices. And that's because it's dependent on using Adobe Flash technology. Although Kali, they are now currently redeveloping A to J for the next version of A to J, which will no longer use Adobe Flash. So in the future, it will be available on all devices that can handle HTML5 content. So hopefully in the future that won't be an issue. And the other challenge is that A to J itself was not designed for touch interfaces. So as we move into a touch computing era, we have to all be aware of how we're designing the user interfaces to make sure that the tap targets, like the buttons, are large enough for people to be able to hit reliably. And I mentioned some of the keys to success already, leveraging the SMS platform to do outreach, and then using pre-existing networks and campaigns.
Terrific. Great. So this is one great example of, providing these online resources for people to access them. We also wanted to talk about, so that's a fairly common, so not a common implementation, but the idea of providing screening tools and forms as a fairly common one in the legal aid sector. I also wanted to look at kind of the idea of taking some of the concepts of e-learning and even gamification of things with the idea of making resources more compelling for the folks who are using them. So for instance, Illinois Legal Aid has a number, if you simply go to their YouTube channel for Illinois Legal Aid, has a number of really interesting videos, which are a combination of kind of video of a person talking and animations, provide compelling and really easy to understand overviews of legal topics. So they're more compelling than just kind of a talking head in a video, and certainly more broken down and easier to understand for instance, a non-English speaker than a block of text about the law. You could take that to an even further degree. So there are a fair number of technologies that are not incredibly expensive that allow you to put together on-demand trainings that bring together all sorts of elements. So PowerPoint, screencasts, audio, video, and things like polls and quizzes. So you could actually have a like a test at the end. What we're actually looking at is one of Idealware's on-demand modules. We have a fair amount of experience in this space. So in order to do this, you're going to require, so just to put together things like power, audio, and video, you're going to need a multimedia software like Camtasia or Adobe Premiere. If you want to do things like polls and quizzes and more audio, so more complex interactive stuff, you're looking to things like Articulate or Adobe Captivate, which are more sophisticated e-learning building programs. Let's turn to Tony for our third time here. And as we morph into the idea of kind of gamification and interactive stuff, Citizenship Works, one of their projects, involves a really interesting test prep application for a mobile phone. Tony, you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, so this mobile application is in development right now. It's being developed for the Android platform first, and will be available for iOS devices later. And the target launch is the end of this year. So we'll certainly be letting the community know that when it's available. But it contains many different of the same components that you would find on the citizenshipworks.org website. General information about eligibility for citizenship, as well as where to find legal help, but the piece that we're more interested in talking about in relation to kind of this section of the presentation is the study guide. As many of you are probably aware, when you apply for citizenship, you have to pass a test, and the test includes being able to read and write basic English, as well as being able to answer questions about U.S. history and civics. USCIS actually currently does provide, or you can find, if you can still find them, a deck of flashcards that they circulate that has, I think, something around 100 questions that people can use to study for the tests. What we did when were designing the app was we wanted to make those flashcards available on all mobile devices and free to download. And so, working with our mobile app developer, a company by the name of American Eagle, they're building a flashcard interface into the Citizenship Works app that will allow people to go through those questions, sort them based on whether they got them right or wrong. And the idea is that you eventually sort of winnow down the deck by getting them right to a point where you're sort of focusing on the ones that you maybe are having trouble remembering, and then get to a point where you'll commit enough of that to memory so that you can pass the test. And then in addition to that, for the reading and writing component, we wanted to try to recreate the actual experience of taking the test. At the citizenship interview, the way you test, the way somebody gets tested on reading and writing is that the officer will present you with a written sentence on a piece of paper, ask you to read it out loud. And so we're going to be building in an audio component which will essentially display a sentence, ask, and then or allow the person to read it sort of quietly to themselves or out loud, and then they can hit a button to play the audio for what that sentence should sound like. And then for the writing component, it would be an audio file that gets played, and then you type out the sentence as you hear it, and then you can tap on a button to display the sentence as it should appear, and you can kind of compare to see how close you were, which sort of lends itself well to these mobile devices in terms of being able to replicate that experience. The app is currently being prepared in English and Spanish, and will eventually be available in other languages as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tony. And let's actually look, so the logical extreme of this kind of, e-learning to gamification is actual games. Elizabeth, you want to give us just a quick overview of iCivics and Mind Blown Life? Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, you are muted. Hang on a second. All right, great. Now you are unmuted.
Let me try that again. Absolutely. iCivics might sound familiar to some of you. It is the pet project, I don't mean that in a demeaning way, of former Justice O'Connor. She has partnered with a bunch of game developers to create games about civics and government. And so they are, I think, primarily Flash-based. You play them online, and you can do various, scenario-based games. I played one that was called The Road to the White House that sort of taught you about presidential politics. So I think the really interesting lesson here is that initially we spoke with Jean Koo, the executive director, and initially they wanted young people to play them on their own, and that did not work as well because kids were playing things like, I don't know, Halo. So they partnered with educators and actually worked to get iCivics as part of the civics courses in schools, and that has been really successful. So I think the lesson there is gamification only works if you have people who want to play your games, and if you have people to help you find those people and connect with that constituent. Laura, you want to move on to Mind Blown Life?
Absolutely.
Great. Mind Blown Life is actually a independently developed game. It's not being developed by a nonprofit. And it's for iOS. It's for the Apple mobile platform. And if anyone remembers The Sims, which was a game that basically you had sort of a family that you created and cared for and navigated through life. Mind Blown Life is like that, but it's for financial literacy. And so it's meant to teach young people financial skills like budgeting, how to balance your checkbook, like things about debt. And actually, if anyone is familiar with the crowdsourcing tool Kickstarter, the developers of Mind Blown Life, Mind Blown Labs, did a Kickstarter for, I think it was about $60,000, which was not the whole budget of the game. They actually met their target, and they're quoting us the budget in the low six figures. And this is actually aimed at young people themselves. So not, that you're not supposed to play this in your civics class. You're supposed to play this on the subway, or at home. And it's obviously not finished development yet, so we can't really attest to how successful it is. But I did think it was interesting that some private game developers are actually looking to sell instructional games like this to teach skills.
Absolutely. And this is so kind of all of the things that we've talked through in this section are really quite proven technologies. There's a whole idea and a whole movement around the idea of games for change. In fact, there's a nonprofit called Games for Change.
Absolutely.
That supports the community. And then obviously e-learning is something where there's huge amount of traction around. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities in this particular realm.
Yeah, there's also the idea of text messaging games, which we saw a few of, which are even more low-tech.
Yep, absolutely. So the idea here is that you would create a game that would help to educate people in some important legal topic. And Helen has given us a great example in the chat. She
Yes.
mentions that her community legal service has developed an online game, in quotes, to help
Mhm.
people draft a will. And she has given us the URL, which we sent on to you. So that's definitely worth a look as kind of an example of what you can do with this kind of thing. Fantastic. So I'm going to do just a quick wrap up here, and then we will leave open for questions, comments, thoughts. Would love to have, certainly some thoughts from Brian, Ed, Tony, other folks who have thoughts about what this all kind of means to the legal aid sector. So we talked to a lot of organizations during the course of this research. What were the trends? What were the things that we really that were the key findings of talking to all of those people? There really were some reoccurring themes. The first being that in general, remote options aren't cheap. It's generally going to be more expensive to support people outside the office, at least in terms of startup. However, many of these things can scale better than office visits. So, for instance, if you're providing access to remote, you're providing on-demand resources, or you're providing, potentially visits via phone call or video conference, that might actually scale better to pro bono attorneys or other options than actually having everybody in the office. So it's going to be some upfront thought and planning and strategy, but there may be scale further on. And this is one that you've probably heard. It was recurring to such a degree that it came up in a huge amount of these case studies, that outreach is a really important key step, that you can't just show up in a new community and expect that people will play your game or use the bus or any of those things. You need to figure out how you'll spread the word around what you're doing and how to build trust among people who aren't necessarily eagerly looking for someone to do what you're doing. And a key way to do that, as we've talked about in a lot of these case studies, is to partner with people who already have the relationship, to partner with libraries, with community centers, with other organizations who already have relationships with the people that you are trying to reach. Scheduling is still an issue. So for anything but the on-demand stuff, any live interaction is going to require scheduling. So you're scheduling a bus or you're scheduling a video conference or whatever, but it still is scheduling. And in fact, the scheduling woes can be worse if it's hard to just reschedule. You can't say, can you come back to the office tomorrow? Because if you come back to the bus tomorrow, the bus is moving on. Like many things, as we're thinking about scaling services, it's going to be really important to weigh quality of services versus the reach. That there is certainly, it's unlikely that remote services are going to match the quality of having someone sitting in your office talking to your lead attorney. That there is, so if you put them on a phone or you do a video conference or you have potentially not your main or most experienced attorney on a bus, any of those things are likely to provide, so it's not necessarily going to be precisely always exactly what's needed and always as top quality as something that you provide in the office. But I think that, and I know that that's a huge issue for folks in the legal aid sector. But on the other hand, it's important to weigh, so that's a really critical thing to weigh. When is quality paramount? So when does it not make sense to be doing these things remotely because you cannot ensure that it is incredibly top quality? On the other hand, when is some help better than no help? So for instance, something like an online website to provide legal aid services, not as helpful as talking to an attorney, but a great deal more useful than nothing. And then just to put something that's probably already close in your mind. So if you are going to provide services that depend on technology, it's always important to figure out what your plan B is in case things don't go as you thought they were going to go. What happens if someone is in real need of aid and the website is down, or the bus can't get there, or the internet is down on the bus, or those types of things. So it's make sure that there is some other option if the first one doesn't work out. Fabulous. And with that, I'd love to just kind of open it up to, let's start with our speakers, but this would also be a great time to ask a question or make a comment if you have one into the chat. Brian, Tony, Ed, thoughts as to kind of what this all means. So thoughts on the those lessons learned or additional lessons that you would point out?
This is Tony. I guess one thing that all of this kind of brought home to me is the sense that all of the technology is there. We've reached a point at which we can do amazing things with technology without, necessarily having to have, computer programmers on staff to help build some of these things. And there's a lot of platforms and tools that are available. And it's really about implementation. And so it's really about thinking and, sort of taking that next step to thinking about, okay, if these technologies exist, who do we know who can help us figure out how to use them, and then who do we know that can help us figure out how to develop a project that implements it in a way that it reaches our communities. And the thing that, for me, I think, and it could be a generational thing, but one thing that I think about a lot is that I think more and more as we're developing these tools, we have to remember that design matters, and that the user interface and user experience of these tools that we develop needs to be sort of considered equally in terms of development time with the substance that we're trying to present as well. And the way I think about it is this. We've reached a point where an organization that doesn't have a website kind of doesn't exist, and people who are thinking about going to an organization for services that doesn't have a website may not trust that organization. I think we're getting to that point where if somebody's looking up an organization's website and the website isn't designed well, not necessarily in terms of like aesthetic sort of subjective judgment, but that there isn't some attention paid to design and interface. Again, that creates a sense of distrust and not feeling like maybe I don't want to use this tool or this site. So at the same time balancing that against accessibility and making sure things like using fonts that are easy to read and readable by folks who might have disabilities and things like that are important as well. But I think that's sort of a recurring theme as we do this work that comes up for me.
Yeah,
Terrific.
The two main things that come out of this for me is really, first, the importance of the connections with community. The technology cost is no longer a barrier here. It's having those connections with community to make sure that the technology gets used. The second thing is the importance of interactive staff interactions in this, so that you can both analyze what's working and what doesn't, because the initial cost of deploying this can be so low that you want to put time and schedule it into the analytics to get feedback for what works, both from the community partner but also from the individual clients, so that you can then iterate on it and improve it over time. So I think that those dual things of find the community partners and then staff so that you can evolve it over time are extremely important.
Absolutely. Terrific. And Helen asks, what would it take to develop an online community of practice to help our sector critique and strengthen practice? Brian, that sounds like a question potentially targeted towards your mission. What do you think there?
I mean, there is definitely a need for more best practices and sharing in this, and that's definitely a lot of what MTAP tries to do. One of the things that we're going to be launching here in the next month or so is a survey bank where people can put up some of the surveys that they use to reach out to clients to get feedback on things and sharing those. But I think also, and if we can broaden our reach by getting more guest contributors for the technologists that are actually putting this stuff in place, that would help a lot.
Terrific. Ed, do you have any final thoughts? So are there things that resonated for you as you were listening yourself to the seminar?
Well, I mean, I share Tony and Brian's appreciation that the technology to do these things is out there, and then it's great and it's wonderful, and there really aren't any bounds other than our creative imaginations. But the thing that I always try and keep in mind is that the technology itself is never the solution to the legal problem.
Absolutely.
It's a means of conveying that, and so we need to be conscious and listen to our clients, and we may have the greatest idea for using technology to get a solution or information out there, but if we put it out there in such a way that our clients aren't going to use it, we do a disservice. So I think a big piece of any technology project that might catch somebody's attention is to build in evaluation, and the most important evaluation is did the target audience use it, and were they able to use it effectively? I think that's something that we always have to keep in mind whenever we do technology projects of any kind.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So we have 2 minutes left. Brian, I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about upcoming seminars?
Yeah, definitely. If you could hand over presenter. Actually, I should even be able to grab that myself.
Indeed. There you go.
LSNTAP now has the schedule coming up for trainings throughout the rest of the year. We've got a informal roundtable coming up to talk about online intake specifically on the 13th, and we've got another one that was just scheduled yesterday on machine translation tools, using things like Google Translate as a starting point or for providing some services. We've also got one coming up on limited English proficiency and technology later on. The last thing that I really wanted to mention was the YouTube channel. All of the videos that we create go up on the YouTube, and we've got a playlist for the most recent webinars. If you subscribe, you'll find them automatically, but this should be up within a week, this presentation here today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much all for attending. This is actually the last in Idealware's series of seminars for this year, though obviously LSNTAP continues. We hope to potentially see you next year as we continue to partner on some seminars potentially. And until then, thanks so much and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Thora. It's been great working with you this year.
Fabulous, and you as well.